Conscious of Krishna at the final hour. The devotee's prayer at the time of quitting the body. Every soul who has tasted even a little sincerity in spiritual life eventually arrives at this prayer. Not the prayer for wealth, not even the prayer for liberation in the abstract, but the prayer to be fully aware and conscious of Krishna at the very moment the body is given up. The Acharyas of the Vaishnava tradition regard this as the single most decisive moment of an entire lifetime, because it is described directly by Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita as the moment that determines everything that follows. In Bhagavad Gita 8.5, Krishna states that whoever remembers him alone at the end of life, leaving the body in that remembrance, attains his nature without doubt. The very next verse extends this into a general law governing every living being. Whatever state of consciousness one holds at the time of death, that state is what is attained in the next existence. This is not offered as poetry. It is offered as a description of how consciousness actually functions at the moment of transition, the way memory and desire carry the subtle body of mind, intelligence and false ego into a new situation exactly as a dream carries the sleeper from one experience to the next. The difficulty is immediately apparent. If the state of mind at death determines the soul's destination, how can anyone be certain of holding the right consciousness at a moment that arrives without warning, in a body that may be racked with pain, confusion or fear? The Vaishnava poet Kulashekara, a king who renounced his throne for devotion, gave voice to exactly this fear in his prayers, pleading that his mind take shelter of Krishna now, in this very life, rather than waiting for a final hour when the throat may be choked and the senses no longer obedient to the will. His prayer reflects the wisdom of the entire tradition on this point. The time to prepare for death is not at death. It is now. Krishna's own answer to this difficulty follows immediately in the Gita, in verses 8.7 and 8.8. He instructs Arjuna to remember him at all times while performing his duties, with mind and intelligence offered to him constantly. This is called Abhyasa Yoga, the yoga of practice, a mind trained through steady repetition until remembrance of Krishna becomes its natural resting place rather than something forced under pressure. A mind that has spent a lifetime wandering after sense objects cannot be expected to turn to Krishna by accident in its final moment. But a mind that has been trained for years through chanting, hearing and remembering will turn to him as naturally as water flows downhill. Srimad Bhagavatam illustrates both the danger and the promise of this law through its narrations. Maharaja Bharat, a soul advanced in renunciation, became attached to a deer he was raising in his final years, and his mind went to that deer rather than to the Lord at the moment of death. As a result, he took his next birth as a deer himself, despite a lifetime otherwise dedicated to devotion. The lesson given is sobering. Even a small, unintegrated attachment can seize a dying mind that has not been fully surrendered. On the other hand, the story of Ajamila shows the boundless mercy available even to a fallen soul, who called out at death to his son Narayana and was delivered by the potency of that name alone, though the tradition is careful to teach this as a demonstration of the Lord's mercy and the power of his name, not as a method to be presumed upon deliberately. This is precisely the question Maharaja Pariksit raised with Sukadeva Goswami upon learning he had only 7 days left to live, and his inquiry forms the foundation of the second canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. Rather than relying on chance, Pariksit sought structured instruction on how to fix his mind so that his remaining days would be spent in full consciousness of the Lord. This is the considered approach the tradition recommends, deliberate preparation rather than hope for a last-second miracle. Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita offers a living example of this ideal in the departure of Haridasa Thakura, who left his body in the presence of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu himself, absorbed in the chanting of the holy name to his final breath, surrounded by devotees in Kirtana. Thus death is held up in the tradition as the model of what is possible when a life has been built around remembrance. Mahaprabhu taught that the holy name is the Yuga Dharma of this age precisely because it remains accessible even to a weakened or distracted mind, when more elaborate meditative practices may be beyond reach under the pressure of bodily collapse. From these teachings the practical instruction becomes clear. The means for ensuring consciousness of Krishna at the time of death is not a technique reserved for the deathbed, but a life built around it from now. Regular chanting of the holy name without offense, hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, the association of devotees, worship of the deity, and remembrance of Krishna's pastimes woven through the activities of daily life, these are the practices that train the mind so that when the final moment arrives, it has somewhere familiar to go. Krishna closes this teaching with assurance rather than anxiety. In Bhagavad Gita 9.22 he promises to personally carry what the devotee lacks and preserve what the devotee has, for one who remembers him constantly. In 9.31 he declares that his devotee never perishes. And in 18.66 he calls the soul to surrender unto him alone and not to fear. The prayer to be fully conscious of Krishna at the time of quitting the body is therefore not a prayer of calculation or dread. It is the natural culmination of a life of devotion, offered now, practiced now, so that it requires no effort to remember at the end what the heart has already chosen to love.